Thanks, Sam. So, what happens when I go for these conferences every year? This is the ninth year, as Hemant told, that it's like charging myself. So I get fully charged with ideas, and then someone will wonder why is this guy coming every year? I mean, there's so much repetition. There's what's new every year. What's new is that my level of charge goes down, and it's time to recharge again. So I come here, and it's some kind of rededication or recharging that happens. So one of the things that I want to do is to recharge pass some of the charge to you guys. So right now I'm 100% charged. So I want to pass some of the charge to you guys so that you get some of the charge and go back and try implementing some of the stuff yourself. And we plan to do it every year so that So one thing that came out very loud and clear, and which I've been talking for last year or so, if you remember. So Agile is not remained restricted to software development. In fact, one of the sound bites that I heard this year was the very word engineering is restricting our thinking to what we can do in software. So the software is not about engineering. Software is about people. And Agile is more about managing people than software. So it has more to do with managing people. So it is coming through very loud and clear that it's not the practices. If you look at the principles, if you see the Agile manifesto, the left hand side and the right hand side, you value people over processes. So look at the left hand side. That is very important, right? So one of the takeaways was Olaf Levitz said that we just need a 1-point manifesto. That 1 point is we value people. Full stop. There's nothing else about Agile that we need to stress or make it more important. So I'm going to go over some of the tidbits. I might not be able to cover everything. So there are some pictures I would show, some videos I would show. So whatever I could get together. One of the things that also happened was, you can follow me on Twitter. I've got a few hundred tweets in this last week. I have some 21,000 views and some few hundred retweets. So you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle was isvinayak, which was put up on the first slide. So it will bring up again. So I have tried to capture everything that I am seeing here and more of it on Twitter. So you can follow me, and I'm going to be blogging about it. So you can follow me on my blog as well. My blog is again published on the Synergic site. So let's see what we heard about managing people. So it's basically healthy, happy work environment, right? I mean, it's common sense. So it is the bottom line. So if you have a healthy and happy set of people working, where trust is the bedrock. So you have to trust people. If you don't trust people, you have rules, regulations, right? Then you have to monitor whether those processes and those rules and regulations are being followed. That doesn't scale. You have to trust people. So trust is the bedrock of high performance. So this is something that Diana Larsen said. This is a picture which I've captured from Diana Larsen. So it's trust, commitment, conflict. Conflict is also important. Very often we don't agree with everything the other person is saying, but we keep quiet. We don't bring up. So this is very important that we also talk about things that we don't agree about. So conflict, creativity. So these are the in their order of decreasing importance, starting from trust. So trust is the bedrock of high performance, is what Diana Larsen said. And for building trust, you need to, as I said, embrace commitment, conflict. Think about things that you, like I said, which were never discussed. And one of the things we also learned was self-selection. So Hemant will be covering this again in his top 10 points. That there was an experiment where people were allowed to select whatever they wanted to do, and whatever you're happy doing yourself, you're best at, you're allowed to self-select And there's a team, that case study that Hemant will go through, which is very interesting. But this got touched upon in a number of topics this time. The self-selection is, if you allow people to select and choose, that really unleashes their potential. That's the best way to get top performance. Other thing is that when you trust people, you have to also allow them to fail. Right? They will make mistakes. So when you're trusting people, you cannot say that I'm trusting you, but then you got to succeed. No, that doesn't go. So you have to allow. So you have, just the way you have fail-safe systems, you have to have fail-safe relationships, wherein the relationship doesn't get negatively impacted in case of failure. So that's another thing that is good. And we covered the manifesto single point already. Theory. Who has heard of theory X and theory Y here? So theory X is about tightly controlled regulations and rules. Theory Y is where you trust people. So uncertainty. VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity. So when this goes up, what we call as the business VUCA, when it goes up, you need trust. So that's the thing, that because you cannot make a rule about something that you don't know. Uncertainty means what? You don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. So you can't make a rule based on something that you know. But tomorrow is going to be something that you don't know. So you need to trust people, and that is a scalable model. Other thing is budgets. Budgets, there is, how do you budget? Budgets are something which got discussed in one of the keynote addresses. So budgets get allocated, and there's a lot of gaming that happens that, when the budget gets allocated, you tend to spend that budget, because if you don't spend that budget, you won't get it next year. So it has to be more, if you're talking about trust, it has to be more need-based. You cannot just say that this is the budget. When you are interested and empowered to decide whether something is needed, if it's needed, you spend it. If it's not needed, you don't spend it. And when the trust is mutual, of course, when the management starts trusting you, start trusting the management both ways. Then that's what will happen. So, to compare the theory X and theory Y, you cannot manage theory Y kind of set of people who are to be trusted, who are self-organizing, who are motivated, with theory X rules. You need to have the environment also, which allows them to work in that. So the analogy that was given by the keynote speaker was that of a traffic signal versus a roundabout. So in case of a traffic signal, you have the rules. So you have, even if there is no traffic, if there's a red light, you have to stop. But you can't have the decision in your hands and say that, okay, even if it's red, but there's no traffic, I'll go. That doesn't happen. But in case of roundabouts, you are more empowered to decide. You have to collaboratively work with others in the traffic to get around, and so that is more of a self-selecting, self-organizing team which works like a roundabout, right? Where you are empowered, you are trusted, where you take the decisions, and not like a traffic light where you are being given a set of rules with which you are working. So that was the takeaway. So now I'll let Hemant talk about scaling Agile version, which was the second topic.
Alright. So second topic in our Meta Top 10 is this topic of scaling Agile. So the topic was that most organizations have successfully embraced Agile when it comes to few teams. The real challenge lies in when you have to go to hundreds of teams. That becomes hard. Right? So far there are many frameworks or approaches. So this is a pretty much exhaustive list what's out there. So they all got covered. So right now, Scrum of Scrums has been kind of one approach. And I was in one meeting today. I think you were mentioning was your Scrum of Scrum experience match. So with a few teams, you can do Scrums. If you're 2, 3, 4 teams, maybe if you're co-located, you can bring the Scrum Masters and they can do a Scrum of Scrum, and maybe that will be good. But beyond that, you could do Scrum of Scrum of Scrum. That doesn't work, right? So it becomes very hard to scale. So that's the very limiting. The other alternative is, in all cases, you will see when I have tried to be honest to provide reference to the people. So you can either Google them or ask us. We'll provide you with their presentation or links. So where the content is coming from, because some of the links are very valuable. So another one is what they call large-scale Scrum. I don't know this very well, but this is by Craig Larman, another kind of a stalwart in the Agile community. Third one, which is getting a lot more adoption, and I was skeptical, and a lot of people are skeptical, is called Scaling Agile Framework, which is by Dean Leffingwell, another major stalwart has written a book. So what they've done very well, it occurred to me in the conference this time, is that Dean came up with this framework while he was working for BMC. So when he was actually trying to scale Agile in a large company context, hundreds of teams, and that's where so it came up, and right now they're at least somewhere between 20 to 100 implementation of SAFe out there of large scale. So this appears to me, based on what I've learned, to be the most, that's why I put it in bold, is the most widely accepted and practiced scaling framework. And I'll show you a page to give you a glimpse of it in the next page. And there are many consulting firms out there who are building their business by coaching and training on SAFe framework. So in my opinion, this is probably the most practical one out there right now. Although having said that, people have skepticism around it being too heavy and bring some of the waterfall kind of a nature to it. But regardless, if you're a large organization, you're a Bank of America, and you need to roll out Agile to thousands of people, you got to figure out a way to make it work. So this is a framework that allows you to do that. Another one that is started by Scott Ambler, another stalwart category person, is called Disciplined Agile Delivery. So that has its own pluses and minuses. I feel, based on the general opinion, this is less widely adopted. Still out there, but then the two new ones that came up this conference was, one is the Spotify. I'll cover that separately. I think the Spotify story warrants a discussion by itself. So I mentioned in the beginning, they have scaled it to 3 teams or so, and using a slightly different approach to scaling than the other frameworks here. So that's also now being considered a scaling framework, although that's not how they started. And then there was a new session by Jeff, who's also another stalwart category person, part of the 12 signatories. So he has come up with what he calls Scrum at Scale, which is, now I've understood it, is more of a meta framework. So he sort of, you think of scaling Agile like object-oriented programming. Same idea. You just got to approach it the same way. So it is a meta framework, and frankly, in my opinion, it's not too theoretical to me to apply. And his description was, you can take scale Agile framework SAFe, and you can cast it in the form of the Scrum at Scale using the object-oriented approach. So in terms of practice, scaled Agile framework is it. That's what it seems like right now. So I would suggest, if you guys are struggling with the challenge of Agile adoption, that's another good resource that came up where I learned a lot. Was this a separate company. They have put together a whole comparison matrix of these frameworks. So there's enough challenge and pain on this topic that this company, they have this website where there's a whole spreadsheet. You can go in, you can download the spreadsheet, or you can review the spreadsheet. You can provide, in fact, inputs into it, and I'm saying here is actually covered in it. But ultimately, the final point is very important. Like when I said in the first, it's more about people and culture than about framework. That's the actually very important theme about today in our discussion, and it was very clear in the conference that Agile is about people. And when you think about scaling Agile, it is about your company culture and changing the Agile mindset at all levels, not just having a framework. Okay. So let me now show a picture of the Agile. This is the Agile's. This is what. So we very organized about evolving. Basic takeaway is it covers for a large enterprise. If you try to scale it to hundreds of people, at a bottom level, you have a team level processes that are described. And next level up is a portfolio, a program level, and then the highest level is a portfolio level. They're completely ironed out all things. It seemed too organized to be appropriate, but seems like companies are following, and most companies end up tailoring this framework to a certain extent in their environment. But this seems to be the most widely followed. So next point, when
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so Ashutosh's question was, I mean, if for all of you who can hear this, is there any pattern of larger companies following SAFe and other smaller companies perhaps following an alternative framework? My impression is, from the conference at least, is that the topic itself for scaling only comes into place when you have large number of teams. So I think a large number is beyond hundreds of teams. If you are in that, the 30 team example I said, Spotify is a great example actually. I would highly encourage to cover it in a few minutes. But when you have hundreds of teams, geographically distributed, various businesses, then you gotta have. So I think this framework seems to, because it starts from the portfolio level, which is where the management decision making happens about allocating around whether you're a product company or IT services company. It doesn't matter. I think this applies to both. So my impression, I was skeptical before the conference, but after hearing the success stories in the executive forum, they talked about Agile transformation. I'll cover them. I generally saw this a version of this being followed by and large. So large companies follow this, and companies below that, you're right. I've not seen. I didn't come across if you only have, let's say, 30 teams, is someone following SAFe. That's not. I don't know for sure. You guys keep asking questions. I think that's.
I think it makes it more participative. So lean startup was a big topic. The keynote, Microsoft, the first keynote, the kickoff day Microsoft keynote was all about. So lean startup is taking Agile to the next level, where Agile will stop at releasing when the QA certified is good enough to be released, right? Whereas in case of lean startup, you go one step further. I mean, that's not good enough. Only when there is customer acceptance in the market or rejection, whatever it is, unless you get customer feedback, it is not complete. The iteration is not complete till you have customer feedback. So what we call this as a hypothesis-driven development, wherein there is a hypothesis that you start a sprint with, that the button should be in the right-hand side, top corner, or left-hand side, bottom corner, whatever may be the hypothesis when it works well, and validate that hypothesis at the end of the sprint. It's not just that the QA certifies that this looks good, but it is the customer likes it or doesn't like it, whatever be the validation. I mean, it's a falsifiable hypothesis. So even if you get a feedback, there is learning in it. Feedback that it's not good, that is learning, so that you can improve upon it. So that is the spirit of lean startup, and I found that last year there was talk about it. This year it is beyond. There's no question. I mean, lean and agile are going in hand, and then people freely mingle their ideas across these two movements, so to say. Agile is a movement, lean startup is a movement. But both these movements seem to be merging, and there's a confluence of these two movements that is happening. So what we saw was, like, in 2006 when I went for the Agile conference, I was a rookie, a novice at it. So the guy sitting next to the lunch table, he asked, "Do you do Agile in your company?" That used to be the question that got asked in 2006. The same way, now it's like, do you do lean startup? So it's not only restricted to a startup. The lean startup is a movement that goes beyond a startup to larger companies. So whether it is GE or whether it is Microsoft, all these companies are doing lean startups. So though they called it something else, the keynote address was about what they call as cloud cadence. Just like internet speed, now the next thing is cloud cadence. So he said that we move at cloud cadence, and we release every 4 weeks. There is a release. So Microsoft, he was talking about Visual Studio. He was the product manager for Visual Studio, and they release every 4 weeks, and they get feedback from the customer. They have matrix, they have analytics, who is liking, who's not liking, and they have feature flags. So feature flags are, when they release, not everything that is deployed gets seen. So the deployed feature is masked, and when you open the feature flags, the feature gets opened to people. So they do it on a regular basis. They started this in 2008. So Microsoft has been doing it for last 4 years. So company like I just had this session, and immediately after that I went for lunch, and I had this guy from GE sitting next to me. He asked me exactly the same question: do you do lean startup? So I said, do you do lean startup? Since you are from GE, for we are a relatively smaller company, so it's a bigger question. So he said, yes, of course we do lean startup, and we have a few hundred teams. I said, what is the team size? So each team is of about less than 10 people, 8 to 10 people, and they have their own startup. And there are so many companies. To give you examples, and there is the WordPress is produced by a startup, and then Intuit is another example. They call themselves a company of 1,000 startups. So what is a startup? Startup is not something which you do out of a garage. It's something where you're bringing value to a customer in conditions of extreme uncertainty. It's the institution which brings value to a customer in conditions of extreme uncertainty, as defined by Electric. So it's not restricted that you have to do startup in a small company. It's not that. It's about. So what we are seeing now is this has become a mainstream kind of movement, and that's something which is the next big thing that I noticed there. So I think I'll let Hemant talk about. Before that, I'll also talk a little bit about UX. So I spent a lot of time on UX. I attended 5 or 6 sessions on UX this time. The user experience is going to be a separate topic, but lean UX is something which got traction. So when you talk about a hypothesis, that has to happen by showcasing your product to a customer. So getting customer feedback, showcasing. So that is like doing some kind of user experience research and finding what works, what doesn't work. So that is something that we talked about and we saw in this. So it is like the design thinking, lean startup, and agile. These 3 disciplines are kind of, again, there's a kind of convergence or confluence, if you call it, to define a new discipline called lean UX. So UX, as you know, this is not product design or some kind of very high-end design thinking that happens where they do research in UX laboratories. These laboratories are very fancy things, where they have semi-transparent glass behind which people are sitting and observing others, their users, and then they hire users and they pay them money to come there and become beta users. So that was the idea about user experience, where it used to take kind of months to get to a good user experience. So that is changing. And lean UX is something that you can do in 3 or 4 weeks. I'll talk a little bit more about it. So it is more of prototyping, testing, and learning cycles. So you show a prototype, quickly test it, learn from it, go ahead, make changes to the prototype. So I'll talk more about it later. So what do you know? Yeah, question. Yeah, so as I understand, again, this maybe my takeaway could be different from yours. So as I understand it, what happens is you have configuration as code when you have cloud, right? So cloud cadence is different because you are able to quickly deploy something. So deployment requires you to test something, which requires you to create the test environment. Then for deploying something, you might have to do A/B or blue green kind of thing, in which case you may not be allowed to disturb what is running in production, but you have to create the production environment which is green So that again gets created by running a piece of code, a script. So that is cloud cadence, where you're running on a continuous basis, very high frequency. Configuration gets configured as code runs, and the speed at which it happens, the cadence at which it happens, is it sounds like similar term that we used a few years back, as I said. The internet speed. So it's cloud cadence. So that's what my understanding is. You might think differently, but that's what I thought. Yeah.
All right. So moving on to the next takeaway, number 4, for me, then mine was I refer to this as Spotify story. So this is a really interesting one. At one level, there's nothing new here. So Spotify is a company. I don't know how many of you know. It is, I think, roughly about 7-year-old, and their mission is to be the music player of choice. They have 6 to 10 million kind of users. So early stage company, relatively new, in a fast-moving, dynamic environment, very innovative. They have to release features very frequently. So, and then they wrote this case study. This was actually last year. So 30 teams across 3 cities, and we learned this year they're doubled already beyond this number. So they applied essentially what we management types would call a matrix team structure into this engineering agile environment. So how to apply, so if we were to take away something here is how to apply a classical matrix organization model into an engineering software organization in an agile form. So this is the structure. Next page will have more detail, and I'll provide you a link. I highly recommend reading this simple white paper, 13, 14 pages, a lot of pictures, easy read. So they organize themselves along this way. Let me go through each of these categories. This has almost become a language that people are talking now in this community of Agile. So the main dimension is what they call squads. So squads are what you would consider a scrum team, essentially. Typical scrum team is a squad owned by a product owner. So product owner drives the business direction. But the distinction here is, a subtle one, is that each squad is being run as if it is a startup by itself. With a clear focus of that you own, let's say, the search functionality so you own the roadmap related to search. So it's as if you're running a startup and there are 4 to 10 people in a 4 to 7 people in a squad. So they think of each squad as a startup. So these are collection, and collection of squads form a tribe. So tribes are in related areas. So in adjacent areas of feature functionality, so they have to have some level of coordination. They form a tribe. So that's the nomenclature here. And then chapters are essentially think of it in the functional. So QA testing is a chapter. So functional, so there's a QA manager, a chapter leader in this case. So development or parts of front-end development may be a chapter, back-end development may be a chapter, QA may be a chapter. Those are chapters. And then they have this notion of guild. So guild is essentially, it spans across the tribes, and the idea is these are like-minded people who want to follow. If you want to follow UX, let's say, you could be a developer, a back-end developer, but you're interested in UX, so you are part of a guild called UX Guild. And there are more details in the white paper around each of these. And I put a reference to the white paper here. I think I highly recommend you read it. But it essentially tailors and applies, and I kind of went through the words here very easily, that applies the matrix structure, and which seems to be sticking. And there's an element of self-organization, which I skipped over in squads. So squads are self-organized. And I'll cover self-organization by topic by itself, where a company actually took this thinking from last year and applied it in their environment. That's another interesting story. But this is one of the key takeaways, is to really apply the Spotify model of scaling engineering. And in this case, the scaling is only up to 30 and now probably 50, 60 teams. So not the side of hundreds of teams yet, but it's very relevant in the engineering organization. Any questions on this one? Let's keep moving to the next.
So last year I talked about, I don't know, how many of you heard, how many of you have some knowledge about the practice called Randori? Randori is actually coming from the world of martial arts, where the person who is being challenged is attacked at the same time by multiple of his opponents, and that's Randori. So that's the way of practicing martial arts. So what I had talked about last year was you project your code using a projector, and everybody in the team, there are 6 or 7 people pouring at your code and pointing defects and telling you how to improve it. That's the practice for randomly. Pair programming is something that we already know. So this same practice was taken to the next level by a company by Woody Zoe, where they decided to put a team consisting a completely staffed team consisting of product owner, developers, QAs, deployment operations people, everybody in the team, business analysts in a room. They had only one computer, 2 keyboards and 2 projectors. So they call it mob programming. So everybody is writing the same code at the same time. Only one person is allowed to write because there's only one computer. And everybody else is seeing it on this. And they keep on delivering one feature at a time. So let's see what it did. So you advance the slide, thanks. So mob programming, it's the advantages that accrued. Well, one thing that happens is all of you are working on the same thing at the same time. So there's no one waiting, because if you have a question, if you need a question to be answered, the person who's to answer that question is right there in that room, right? So there's no one waiting for it. So the waiting time is saved. The second thing is there's no switching of context. Everybody is working on the same context, whether it is QA automation, whether it is development task, or whether it is deployment task. Everybody is completely focused on working that. That also builds sort of a teamness, or the team feels that they own everything. So it builds T-shaped skills. So it's not that on a particular day that a developer is absent, team doesn't make progress, because everyone knows everything that the developer was working on, and people tend to own up the responsibility. Someone else, maybe a QA, will work as a replacement for him on that particular. The other thing that happened was there's no switching of context. So people continued working on the same thing at the same time. So often what happens is you get distracted, you get pulled out of your work and somebody else calls you. So if somebody else walks by this team, you'll find that you're in a meeting, because you're always in a meeting. So nobody's going to disturb you. So that is one way of keeping the team entirely focused on what they're doing. So let me see if I missed something. Of course, no politics, less code. Yeah, that's the important one. So it very often happens that 2 people work on the same thing because they think differently how to implement it. So you have 2 pieces of code implementing the same functionality. It happens very often. So if the whole team is working in one room, that is avoided. So you end up having less duplication, less code, and as a result, low technical debt. So these are some of the things. They have been working this way for the last 3 years, and they have been delivering high quality software. So I have a video. I mean, this is something which is hard to believe how they do it, right? So I have a video in the next slide where we'll actually see them doing it. So there is no sound track, but that's good enough. This is directly from YouTube. So this is a day of mobbing. So I'm going to just starts at 8 a.m. And what you see here is a bunch of people sitting in the same room in a socially collegial environment, joking and talking about starting the day. And you see this facilitator, Woody Zoe, who's sitting in the corner, who's pretty much doing nothing. He's taking notes. But there's only one computer, 2 keyboards, and these 2 projectors that you see, right? And there are 15-minute rotations. So every 15 minutes, the person who's coding changes. The person who's coding is called the driver. So he changes. So this is a driver. So you'll see that every 15 minutes he rotates. If the driver starts getting ideas about how to implement, he becomes a navigator. So there's this product owner who's ready to answer all questions, who's a part of the team. And then this manager coach is Woody himself, and then you have all others in the team are called navigators. Navigators are the ones who tell the driver where to go, right? So, and if the driver wants to navigate himself, he has to give up control to some other person to take the driving seat, and then he goes and navigates himself. And there may be time when only one person is working. Yeah, it's free because everyone else has gone out for coffee. Yeah, so it happens. So they have this very nice setup, and they continued working in this room for 3 years to produce results. Yeah, so this goes on, and I'll just quickly advance it. I think it's taking time to load, so it's okay. I think you got the gist of it, so I don't want to, all people working on the same problem at the same time in the same place. That's the gist of it. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
So, it's just a really interesting thing. We get the collective spirit and like the project. And I'm wondering, like, with this organization, do they have a group that's working in this particular method of a practice, and a group working in a different practice, and is there a way to share the value of those two different groups working in different
Yeah, there is more than one such groups. Only one group is working in this way. Rest all the teams are working in the normal way that we do. And this particular, so cross functionality taken to the next level. So we are talking about being cross functional and continuous. So here it is continuous pairing, continuous cross functionality in the same room. So it is a very different way of doing it. So I'm going to try it, and I already have a team in my mind. So I'm going to try it, and I have 2 projectors and a computer, so no problem. Yeah, and I'm going to come back and report. Yeah, so as of now, I'm fully charged to do it. I'll come back and report next year, how long that charge lasts.
I think it's easy to say, going into an experiment like that, you want to have everybody ready to be getting things. But going back to the soft science and managing people, a lot of the upfront investment, researching the personalities, the trust factor, and the gut instinct, and the extrovert versus introvert team dynamics are so important. And most of the people in this room, I know, deal with co-located teams, so there's that challenge. Knowing the emotional makeup, the psychological, variations, knowing to each player, and how they feel together, and how an 8-hour day is done with a night owl versus an early bird versus a this, that, and the other. So I think a lot of it, just to have a team in mind, is knowing through someone, through a product owner or project manager, someone that's able to give you insight into what mixes align best for a project like that. Has to be up front and done.
I think related to this is the very first point you brought up about executive sponsorship of these kind of changes. When you go to the board and say that you'd like to do something different, there has to be a certain level of trust and some level of measure to do. But done one particular way, a different way. How do we compare?
Yeah, so there what he said was, the same question was asked of Woody, and what Woody said was he himself didn't know that this is going to be successful. So they said they got permission to do it for a week. Okay, and when they saw the results of that week, they said, let's do it for a month. And like that, they've been doing it. Now they've been doing it for the last 3 years. and still the management has not asked them to go back to the old practices. So that's the point in it.
So, yeah, but once you really, if you want to compare apples to apples, it's better than so because from this, those people in the same relationship, one plus one, two, four, they need to know
Yeah. So they were like cross-functional and they taught each other. So some of the time they must have been spent on teaching the others as to what you know and stuff like that. So there was also mentorship involved, and I will be talking about T-shaped skills in a while. So there we talk about how it is important for everyone to know everything, a little bit of it, right? And others who don't know come up to speed. So we'll talk about it, and that is important that everyone knows a little bit of everything, and they have deep knowledge in one of the areas, which we'll talk about T-shaped skills in a while.
Before I go to my next one, let me keep adding to this very interesting topic of mob programming. So next morning, I found myself having breakfast with Woody. So without knowing, I ended up at an empty table, and he ended up being the guy sitting across from me having breakfast. So I was talking about other topics. He's such a good kind of a leading thinker. He has another movement called No Estimate, which I'm going to cover in a few minutes. So I will highly recommend. But one of the things I took away on mob programming, estimate. Estimate. I know you will like that topic. Yeah. That's the essence of it, exactly. So on mob programming, so what he said was that they've been doing it, and so he's a practitioner, and they believe that you would think that 5 people sitting in a room, they're producing output that justifies the investment of 5 people instead of having 5 people working at different parts of the code. So first thing is, looks like the end result justifies the investment. The quality of code, the output they produce, and all that clearly does. But more important thing he mentioned was what it does, as he has been doing this, is it makes the entire process a lot more fun for the team. So what software development used to be, there's a misconception around software development that if you go to undergrad in engineering or computer science and you pursue that path, you're going to be sitting in front of a computer and coding. And a lot of people don't like that. They don't want to be isolated, and so there's the equation that is understood these days that being in computer science and programming means sitting across, isolated, doing development by yourself. And he said, look, when he showed this to people, this is a lot more fun. Now people want to do computer programming because it is fun activity. So it increases the level of interest, and more people are in it. So I thought that was an interesting perspective that I didn't think about.
Was it the same team for 3 years, or was it just conceptual ideas spread?
I don't know.
It was the same team, so same people. They didn't get bored.
Yeah, I don't know about that. When
Anywhere
I attended, I missed the session. I just had a breakfast session with this guy, so I had a little more color on this. So interesting topic. It's kind of a next level of pair programming, essentially. Okay, moving on to the next topic is self-organization.